Before the first pale hints of dawn crept over the torn fields of northern France, a strange silence settled across the British lines. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the ears, heavy and unnatural, as though the earth itself were holding its breath. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, thousands of German gunners were already standing by their weapons, fingers poised, eyes fixed on watches. In a matter of moments, the calm would shatter. Private Arthur Collins lay curled in the bottom of a muddy trench, his greatcoat pulled tight against the bitter cold. He had barely slept. None of them had. For days, rumors had rippled through the ranks, whispers of a massive German attack, an assault unlike anything the war had yet seen. Every distant rumble, every flicker in the sky, set nerves on edge. Men checked their rifles again and again, counted their ammunition, and stared into the darkness beyond the wire, trying to imagine what was waiting for them. At exactly 4:40 a.m., the world exploded. The first shell screamed overhead like demonic birds, followed instantly by a deafening roar that seemed to tear the air apart. The ground convulsed, throwing men against trench walls, burying some alive beneath collapsing parapets. Gas shells burst open with dull thuds, releasing clouds of choking vapor that slithered through the trenches. Shouts of "Gas! Gas!" rang out as soldiers scrambled for their masks, hands shaking as they struggled to secure the straps. Within seconds, Manchester Hill was engulfed in smoke, fire, and poison. At the heart of this inferno stood Lieutenant Colonel Edward Harrington, a man whose life before the war had revolved around books, lectures, and quiet walks through university gardens. Now, streaked with mud and sweat, revolver in hand, he moved calmly through the chaos. He paused beside stunned soldiers, gripping shoulders, locking eyes, and shouting words of encouragement that cut through the thunder of the barrage. Where panic threatened to take hold, his presence steadied it. Years earlier, Harrington could never have imagined himself here. In the summer of 1914, he had been a lecturer in history, absorbed in dusty archives and the delicate craft of teaching. His days were measured in lectures and essays, not in shells and blood. But when Britain declared war, something fundamental shifted inside him. The abstract ideals of duty and honor, once confined to the pages of books, suddenly demanded real sacrifice. Without hesitation, he walked away from the life he loved and enlisted. At first, he joined as an ordinary private, standing shoulder to shoulder with clerks, shop assistants, and factory workers. Many of them had never fired a rifle before. Training was brutal and relentless, but Harrington proved himself quickly. His calm authority, sharp intelligence, and unflinching composure under pressure marked him out. Within months, he was commissioned as an officer and assigned to a newly formed battalion composed largely of men from the industrial north of England, friends, neighbors, and colleagues who had volunteered together. From the beginning, he understood that leadership in war was not about barking orders from the rear. It was about sharing hardship, danger, and fear. He slept in the same filthy dugouts, endured the same hunger, and marched until his feet bled. Slowly, quietly, he earned their trust. His baptism of fire came on the Somme. On the morning of July 1, 1916, his battalion climbed out of their trenches and advanced into a storm of machine gun fire. Men fell by the hundreds, cut down before they had gone a dozen steps. Amid the slaughter, Harrington was struck in the shoulder by a bullet that nearly knocked him flat. Blood soaked through his tunic, but he refused to fall back. Instead, he rallied shattered platoons, dragging the wounded into shell holes, shouting orders until his voice was raw. By nightfall, he was still standing, though barely. For his courage, he was awarded a medal, but the real reward was the unbreakable loyalty of his men. The months that followed were a blur of mud, shellfire, and exhaustion. At Arras, his unit clawed forward through shattered villages. At Passchendaele, they They waded through knee-deep mud under relentless rain, hauling guns that sank with every step. Men drowned in shell holes filled with water. Others went mad from the constant bombardment. Through it all, Harrington remained, a steady figure amid the ruin. By 1918, he commanded the battalion. The promotion weighed heavily on him. Every casualty report, every letter to grieving families, carved another wound into his heart. Yet he never allowed the burden to show. To his men, he was the calm center of their storm. In March, ominous signs multiplied. German aircraft prowled overhead. Artillery fire increased daily. Prisoners spoke of massive troop movements. Intelligence officers warned of a coming offensive that would dwarf anything seen before. When Harrington's battalion was ordered to occupy Manchester Hill, a forward position jutting into no man's land, he immediately grasped its significance. This was a place the enemy would strike first. Manchester Hill was a scarred rise of earth, pockmarked with craters and lined with trenches hastily dug into chalky soil. From its summit, one could see miles across the devastated landscape. Whoever held it could observe and direct fire deep into enemy territory. Whoever lost it opened a gap that might tear the entire front apart. Harrington walked the lines tirelessly, inspecting every trench, every machine gun nest. He spoke quietly with his officers, laying out his expectations with stark clarity. They would likely be surrounded. Reinforcements might never reach them. Their task was simple and terrible: hold the hill at all costs. On the night before the attack, he moved through the trenches, stopping beside exhausted sentries. He offered brief words of encouragement, a reassuring hand on a shoulder. In one dugout, he sat for a moment, writing a final letter. He did not speak of fear or despair, only of pride in his men and the hope that, whatever happened, their stand would matter. When the bombardment finally began, it surpassed even their worst expectations. 4 hours, shell after shell pounded the hill. Trenches vanished beneath avalanches of earth. Entire sections of wire were obliterated. The air burned the lungs, and the constant concussion left men stunned, half-deaf, and disoriented. Yet Harrington remained on his feet. Through gas clouds and flying debris, he moved from position to position, checking on his men, directing fire, organizing defenses where trenches had collapsed. When runners brought word that communication lines were down and flanking units were falling back, he instantly understood what it meant. They were being isolated. As the barrage lifted, a dense fog rolled across the battlefield. Out of it emerged shadowy figures, German stormtroopers, moving swiftly, silently, bypassing strong points and cutting off pockets of resistance. The fight became savage and intimate. Rifles cracked at point-blank range. Grenades exploded in narrow trenches. Bayonets flashed in brief, brutal struggles that ended in seconds. When a German assault group broke into one section of trench, Harrington seized a bag of grenades and charged forward himself. Witnesses later spoke of seeing him vault the parapet, revolver blazing, bombs flying from his hands. The attackers recoiled in shock, leaving their dead behind as they fled back into the smoke. By midday, the situation was desperate. Ammunition was nearly gone. Casualties were catastrophic. The British line elsewhere had collapsed, and Manchester Hill stood alone, a tiny island in a sea of enemy troops. Still, Harrington refused to yield. He sent one final message back through a half-buried telephone cable. His battalion would hold to the last man. Then the line went dead. As German artillery was dragged forward to blast the remaining defenses at close range, Harrington gathered the survivors. Many were wounded. All were exhausted. He looked at them, faces smeared with mud and blood, eyes hollow yet resolute. He told them simply that they had done their duty, and now they would finish it together. The final assault came in the early afternoon. Shells smashed into the last trenches, burying defenders and attackers alike. German infantry surged forward, firing and shouting. The remaining British soldiers met them with their last rounds, then with bayonets, then with fists and rifle butts. In the midst of it all, Harrington stood exposed, firing his revolver until it was empty, urging his men to fight on. When a German officer shouted for surrender, there was a brief, eerie pause in the chaos. Smoke drifted across the shattered hill. The few remaining defenders turned toward their commander. Slowly, painfully, Harrington straightened to his full height. Blood ran down his face from a head wound. His uniform hung in tatters. Yet his voice, when he spoke, was clear and unwavering. "Never!" A volley of rifle fire answered him. When the smoke cleared, Manchester Hill had fallen. Of the hundreds who had defended it, only a handful survived to reach British lines. The rest lay scattered across the churned earth, their stand written in blood and sacrifice. Yet their resistance was not in vain. For crucial hours, they delayed the German advance, buying time for reinforcements to rally and new defensive lines to form. Their sacrifice blunted the edge of an offensive that might otherwise have shattered the Allied front completely. In the weeks that followed, the tide of the war slowly turned. Fresh American troops poured into France. Allied forces regrouped and counterattacked. By November, the guns finally fell silent. Long after the war, veterans who had survived Manchester Hill spoke of Harrington in hushed tones. They remembered the calm in his eyes, the steadiness of his voice, the way he walked the trenches as if nothing on earth could frighten him. To them, he was more than a commander. He was the embodiment of courage itself. In a conflict defined by unimaginable horror, his final stand became a symbol of unyielding resolve, a reminder that even in humanity's darkest moments, the light of bravery can still burn fiercely, if only for a moment, against the gathering night.